Recording. All right. So, what do we have left in this class? We've taken taken 2 tests now, which I get to grade over Easter. And we have so there's labs, there's still a couple more labs to come, maybe one more homework to come. We have 2 tests and a final, which is really just the 3rd test. That is in the finals week. So let's see when that is. Final exam schedule. Okay. So we meet on what, Mondays and Wednesdays at 3:30. And so here's Monday, Wednesday, 3:30. So the scheduled exam during the finals week, which is not really a final, but just the 3rd test, will be on Wednesday, May 11th at 4 p.m., 4 to 6. Sorry, those of you who want to get out of here early. I don't schedule it. That's just the way it is. All right. So, so we have that exam. You have a project. So there's still a couple more labs. There may be one more homework. We're done the tests, but we still have the final, which is really just the 3rd test. And we have the project. And I've posted the criteria for the project. I think I already have one of the projects. So this project is for you to just fit in when I give some time in the last week to do the project, but you can do it whenever you want. And then if your project's done and I'm giving you time for the project, then you have that week off from my class. But project is here. And I tell you everything that's supposed to be in the project, and that will be due the last week of class, which is that first week in May. So like probably that Friday. I don't know if I explicitly put a due date anywhere, but it will be due the Friday. So that's what's coming up. The new material is view, which we're working on, and timers, which I have to show you yet. And that will be it. Okay. Any questions about just what remains? No. Okay. If anything that was supposed to be due before test 2 is now worth 90%, but still worth a lot. So do it and get it in. And all this stuff since test 2 is still eligible for 100 until test 2. Until test 3. Okay. All right, and then we were working on views or on View, another library, and so that's what we're doing today. Continuing with View. All right. So I have a bunch of View examples. And let me open up code. Let me open up code. I'm going to open up the folder to downloads. All right. And this is, I've been trying to be a good boy and separate my HTML from my JavaScript from my CSS. And so here is the HTML. I have a link to the CDN for Vue. We're working in Vue version 3. And both of these work. This was the old way to get to version 3. Here's I think the current way to get to version 3, but I think they both work as links to the CDN. Here is me going to my little bit of style. And then Vue, you do an awful lot, at least compared to, say, React. You do an awful lot on the HTML page. React, our philosophy was to almost create the entire page, or at least create most of the stuff on the page in React. In Vue, we tend to put things on the HTML page, but there is some possibility of it doing things, or there's some code or some Vue code on the page. All right, so in this, let me run this, and then so open in the live server. And this is just to show that in the React that I'm doing on the page, I can include some calculation. And we've already seen this because I did the multiplication table, but I just, again, to make it explicit and in a simpler thing, this calculation of 5 times 6 to get me 30 is being done in the Vue in the HTML. And then I can change the number. Okay. So here I am in the HTML. I have an input. Its type is number, and then the V model. So when you have an input, and if you say V model, that means I'm going to have some code, some Vue code, and I'm associating one of my variables in my Vue code with this input. So there better be, here's my calc.js. There better be in calc.js a num1 if I say there's a V model that's num1. But what Vue does for you, if you remember the beginning of the class, I don't have to say in my JavaScript, like say if I had an on input, I don't have to say, here's my on input function, and this num1 variable is grabbed from document get element by ID and go to this particular input. So that part is being taken care of for me by Vue. But what I'm responsible for is if I have a V model that says num1, I'd better over in my Vue class have the corresponding thing here. So if you've done the first Vue assignment where you have, where do I always start with the tip calculator, then you will have a way for them to choose the tip percentage. And so you better have a variable for that. If you have a V model for it, you better have a variable for it. And you'll have another variable for the bill amount. And then somewhere on the page, you will be displaying the total and maybe the tip. So anytime you're using something, displaying something over here, there better be the corresponding thing over here. Now I don't have to have a variable for the product of these two numbers because the Vue can do the calculation. So here in my curly expression that I'm putting on the page, I can do some calculating. And that's all I wanted to show here, just a reminder. We've had those tests in between, but one is the simple, so there's not much to this class right now. All I'm doing is saying I have two variables, num1 and num2, and I started them at 5 and 6. So that says when I start the page, refresh the page, they're 5 and 6. And that's all I really had to do over here in code. But then I had some code sort of hidden on the page. This V model is an association, so I don't have a value. If I have a V model in place of a value. So I don't have a value and then go get the value. I have a V model. If I have a value and a V model, I'm going to start confusing things. So you have to think of that the value is replaced by the V model. And then I can do simple things right on the page within view. Questions? No. Okay. And then the next is just radio buttons of increasing sophistication, but in view. So here's first radio buttons in view, but the radio buttons are sort of mostly hard-coded. And then I will generate them dynamically and make their values objects and have more than one set of radio buttons and get them from a JSON file, just growing in sophistication with each version. Okay, so that is in view radio button simple. There's an HTML, a JS, and a CSS. Okay. So in the JS, in the beginning, I'm keeping it pretty simple. And all I do is announce one that I'm using view, applying it to a pound or hashtag means ID. So I should have something with the ID view_radio. That's where I'm applying my viewness to. And I have an object called a size. It has some data, and the only thing I'm really using is a user size, which is starting off as a quote. So I have no size to begin with. The style was just some background and some input. And then here's the HTML. Let's run it and have a quick look. Open with the live server. There's my radio buttons. And down here, I'm going to display on the page. And I display my size. So as they click the button, I'm displaying my size. We saw in my example of choose a random or choose a number, sort of guess a number game in lab 18, in guess a Roman numeral, I responded to a button click. And I added an example that was easier than Roman numerals, maybe a little more difficult than what you had to do, the restaurant calculator. So I tried to make something that, and I added another example that was maybe a little closer to what you had to do. Okay. So, and they both have clicking a button. So I've done clicking to a button. Right now, I'm not doing clicking of a button. I'm just, as the user changes the choice of the radio button, I'm updating dynamically right then and there. Okay. So what do we have? There's not much to the style. There's not much to the JavaScript at this stage. So most of it's here on the page. I have a set of radio buttons. The V model is user size. Again, if I have a V model on the HTML, I'd better have it over in the view of the JavaScript. Here I do have value. When I had the input of the number type, I had no value because the value was the V model. In radio buttons, I have a value and a V model because each individual radio button has a value, and then the V model is the chosen value from the set of radio buttons. So before I had, in my previous example, it was an input number type, no value. And it would, if I had a value, it would get confused. But here I want both value and V model because I am choosing one of the values from the list of possible values. I give its radio buttons. We played with the radio buttons in regular JavaScript. We played with them in React. We're playing with them again in Vue. And we know that we should give them all the same name. And that's what groups them together and allows the user to choose one from the set. So what have I got here? It's an input of type radio. I gave it an ID. I'm giving it an ID, not for the purposes of Vue, but for the purposes of having it work in collaboration with this label. So I have an ID rad small, and then the label has a 4 rad small, and that makes them work as a unit. So you can click on the radio button or click on the label. It serves the same purpose. I have the name, that is what groups them, so they should all have the same name. The value is what I'm going to grab for the V model if that is the selected radio button. And then I give them this new thing, this new view thing, the V model, and that was associated with a variable in my data on my view in the JavaScript. And then I just have 4 of those radio buttons for my 4 possible sizes. And then here I am on the page. I'm still in the div that is connected to my view code. And I have curly curly. That's my indication that I'm doing some view thing. And I'm displaying the user size. Okay, so that is my first view example with radio buttons, where again, we've seen this idea of the view model before. View model in our previous examples was replacing value, but now in the radio button, we need value and V model to sort of work as a team. Dare I ask any questions? There are no questions. All right. Let's get a little more sophisticated with our radio buttons. Let me clear out my downloads a bit so I'm not confused. Okay. So version 2 of radio buttons, I want to pre-select one of the radio buttons. So I have some style. I added the checked label checked. Remember, this is the sort of adjacency thing. So if the radio button, the input of the type radio is checked and I'm the label next to it, I'm going to change my colors. So I added a little style associated with radio buttons. I have in my, I made possible sizes now. So before, my all I really did before was I said I had a user size, end of story. Now here I have my possible sizes. And I have two things. I have what I'm going to show the user, the name, small, medium, large, extra large, and then I have an abbreviation, SMLXL. And so I have an array. Again, so here I am in my data. This is my sort of JSON or JSON-like notation. I have a property called user underscore size, which its initial value is quote, quote. I have another property called sizes, which is an array. So I have the property sizes, its name, colon separates the name of the thing from the value. The value happens to be an array. It's an array of objects. And these objects have two properties, the size name, the size abbreviation. So I have a set of choices. I'm going to dynamically generate the radio buttons from these set of choices. Then this is the user's choice. So this sizes are the possibilities. User size is the user's choice. And down here, I have a predefined function associated with an event called mounted. So there are some, we can make our own functions. We saw that when we had the radio, when I was responding to the clicking of a button, a guess button in my guess a number game. But this is one of the predefined things called mounted. And this is sort of like when things are getting ready. So I am setting the user size to be S. So I'm going to dynamically generate some radio buttons based on this data. And then when that's sort of all done, I'm going to choose the user size to be S, which will choose for me the first radio button. Let's run it and then come back and talk some more. So here it is. What's different as far as the look goes is I have this styling, so that's a little bit different in the look. When I refresh the page, small is pre-selected, so I'm doing some pre-selecting. That's new. I have a little bit more styling, but what's also new is I'm generating these radio buttons dynamically. They're not as sort of just hard-coded as they were the first time. All right, so here I am in the HTML. I have my link to the CDN. I have my link to my style. I have my area, my division that I'm going to apply the view code to. I made a region, a span, which is supporting a V4, a loop. I'm looping over the sizes. Remember, sizes is something that's over in my view. A size is just something I made up. It's the dummy name of an element of this array. I could call it item, I could call it element, I could call it poop. Doesn't matter. This is just a made up local name. This, on the other hand, is an array that was over in my view code. There it is. I am making, in this loop, I am making the input for the radio button and the corresponding label. It's of the type radio, obviously enough. To make a radio button, you give it the type radio. The things that change, the things that are being dynamically related to the view get a colon before them. So each ID changes. I can't give them all the same ID. That wouldn't make sense. The ID should be unique. So it's not ID, but colon ID equals, and then I'm using a size, that's the element of my array, and then I'm specifically using the size. So that's just an ID. Each name was different. So I can use that as part of my ID. So all the IDs will be unique. I'm giving it an ID so then I can work the radio button in conjunction with the label and be able to click on either one. And so the .4 in my label, the .4 is also a size .size underscore name. These two things should match in order to get these two things to work as a team. That's not what I wanted to do. So I can click on the label or I can click on the radio button itself. That was achieved, as we know, by the ID and the 4 matching. Okay, but again, when I am making it dependent on my view code, I slip in a colon before that. That's my indication that I'm doing a view thing. The name, they all have the same name that groups them. They have different values. So that's colon value. And I'm using the abbreviation for the value. So when you click behind the scenes, I'm going to grab the value. And the V model is the user size. Again, so that will be the thing that you click. So there'll be a value. That's the possible values for my size. V model will be the chosen size. This is the label for the radio button. Then when I'm done the span that's supporting my for loop, I make another span and I'm displaying the user size. So here I am, here's my display of the size, here's my set of radio buttons. Are we okay? Any questions? No questions. All right. I'm going to go up another level in sophistication. So that the last one, first I just had hard-coded simple radio buttons, then I had dynamic buttons that were pre-selected, but I was only getting one piece of information out of the rig. So I was putting two pieces of information when I was generating my radio buttons, that there was a name, small, and a value, S. But now I want to be able to grab both. I want to have access to both pieces of information that the user chose. So I want to be able to say, your size was small, which I'm going to represent by S. So I want both pieces of information. So it's just a slow buildup of sophistication. So that's what's behind this next version, is to be able to grab more information than just the S. Okay, the style I don't think changed. There was one small change here, because what I'm going to have the user choose is now an object. So my user choice, which was my V model, is now an object. So I switched it here to an object. Down here, when I do mount and I'm pre-selecting, I choose an object. So so this part didn't change. When I made my array of sizes, I had an array of objects and they had two properties. So the choices didn't change, but the user choice did change. I made the user choice more sophisticated. Before the user choice was a string, now the user choice is an object. Here are the two places that change is reflected in the JavaScript. My user choice, you can tell I'm making it an object. So user underscore choice colon curly bracket. So it's an object. It's got two properties, size underscore name and size underscore abbreviation, which I'm starting both as quote, quote. Down here, after I've dynamically generated my radio buttons, then I'm making the choice of small s. So I'm picking one of my choices. Okay, I think I could also make the choice sizes 0, sizes square bracket 0. I think I do that later. Okay. And now what's different in the HTML? Link to the CDN, that's not different. Link to the style, that's not different. Have a region of the page where I'm applying view, that's not different. Have span with a V4 looping over the sizes, that's not different. Here's the difference. Where's the difference? The difference is in that the value is now the entire object. So if I'm going to encode, make the V model, make the user size so I made user choice an object, and the user choice comes from the values, then they too had better be objects. So before this said a size like dot value or something, now it's a size or a size dot, size abbreviation. Now it's just a size. So the value that I have is the full blown object. Not the full array, it's just one element of the array, but each element of the array is an object. So here's a change in the radio button that the values, it's colon value because each one's going to have a different value. So I'm getting the values from view. That's why the colon. And I'm doing a size, the full object. In the display, I'm now displaying an object. And I've decided to display the object, the two properties of the object separated by this dash dash. Why, I don't know. That's just what I did. So, and I say, look, I am getting both properties. Okay, so before the previous example, I passed one property, the S for the size. Now I am passing two things. And so if I'm displaying for the user what they chose, I have access to both the size name and the size abbreviation. Questions? Okay. So now I have radio buttons. I'm dynamically generating the radio buttons. I have an array of objects of choices, and I have an object that the user chose from the list, from the array. All right. We just keep doing the same thing, but more sophisticated. What's our next level? So I was simple, I was dynamic, and I pre-selected something. I did objects. Now I'm going to get that sort of set, that array of objects from an external JSON file. Okay. So here we are. code. The new thing is the sizes are now in a JSON, an external JSON file. Why would you do that? Of course you would do that. You're working for some company, you write your code, it connects to a JSON file. They now want to have extra small and extra large. And you, the coder who gets paid a lot of money, don't have to bother changing this. Just somebody who has access to the JSON file. They change the JSON file. Hopefully they use JSON lint and make sure it's good JSON. Otherwise they've broken everything. But all the person now maintaining the code needs to do is know how to write a JSON file, not how to code in Vue. So this gives you more easily maintained code. Okay. So I'm just taking the explicit data, the set of choices, and I'm taking that out of the hands of the program and putting it in a data file. Style didn't change, I don't think. There's JavaScript, and that's got to change because I've got to read that file, and the HTML. So the HTML, I don't think the HTML changed. I have the link to the CDN, I have the link to the style, I have the loop for the radio, or the division where the view is applied. I chose a span to support my view for loop, and I'm making inputs of the radio type and labels. And then down here, I'm displaying the two properties of the object. That didn't change. The change is in the JavaScript. I have sizes is now an empty array. So I have a choice that I started off as blank. I could have just made it curly curly. I could just make it a blank object. That would probably make more sense. I have my data when I start is sort of pretty effectively an empty object and an empty array. I'm switching from mounted, and I'm not doing anything in there, to created. So the fetching of the file worked better with created than with mounted. So I moved this stuff. I have some console logging, that's it. You know, fetch, I'm fetching the JSON. I send back in my first then, I respond with the JSON. Then JSON is the data. Here's the part where I beg you to be careful and look at the JSON and see the format of the JSON. The JSON was an object that had a property called sizes that was an array. So now so now sizes, I have two things called sizes. There's sizes here in Vue, and that's an array. So what I have up here in my data, I still have React on my mind, so I'm used to calling it the state. But what I have up here in my data is an array. And after I read my JSON file, I have to get, and I'm connecting what's in my JSON file to what's in my data. I need to relate like thing to like thing. So size is this, the property of my my view. The sizes property of my view was an array, so I better connect it to the array in my data, which was my JSON. If the data file, if the JSON data file started with a square bracket, if the data file itself was an array, then I would just say that this dot sizes equals the data. So again, always, this is easy to get wrong. Make sure you look at the JSON file you're reading and see what you're getting out of the JSON file. The data is an object, but data.sizes is an array. So I can set sizes equal to sizes. This could have been, this has to match what's up here in the data. This has to match what's in the JSON file. They don't have to match each other. So that this could be choices or possibilities or anything. It's not important that these two have the same name. This must be matched what's above, and this must match what's in the JSON file. I show down here, there's another way to say, I can say data dot sizes, or I can say data square bracket sizes. So JavaScript supports two ways, two notations. The dot notation is an object notation. So we usually use dots for objects. And the square bracket is more of an array notation in JavaScript. But there's a thing known as an associative array, where instead of saying square bracket 0, square bracket 1, instead of an enumerated array, you have what we call an associative array. And so you have, you name your elements of your array. And so you can access this data by treating it like it's an associative array. So you can treat what you get out of JSON as an object, or you can treat it as an associative array. If you run into some JSON, and it exists in the world, where somebody does something terrible, like puts spaces in the names of their properties, they should be shot, but they're not shot, then it's comes in handy to know this notation. It's easier to accept property names that have spaces in them when you're using the associative array notation than when you're using the object notation. Okay. And here's my pre-selecting the first size. And so instead of explicitly saying, oh, it was small, I'm just saying pre-select the first size. Okay. And again, there was no change in the HTML. This was a change in the JavaScript based on getting information that used to be hard-coded here from a data file instead. All right. Almost done. I want to get 2 sets of radio buttons. Because you have to do 3. And I'm just going to show you sort of 2 different ways. You only really have to know one way, but I just wanted to point out in case you go poking around and finding other people's examples. There's 2 ways to handle this one thing. All right. So now I have 2 JSONs. I could have had 1 JSON with 2 properties, but I did it as 2 JSONs. You have to get some stuff from JSON in the lab. You can make it 1 JSON, 2 JSONs, 3 JSONs, however many JSONs you want. It's your choice. So let's see what this does. It's pretty hideous. Open with live server. So now you're going to choose a size and color. And I made in addition to saying the name of the color and having a hex code for the color, I'm also displaying the color in my radio button labels. It looks hideous, but just to show you that, you know, I can do such things. So there's medium, there's blue. Okay, I have 2 sets of radio buttons. I'm allowed to make 1 choice from each. Okay. So connect to the CDN, connect to the style. The style was the same. So bye-bye style. Okay, there's nothing interesting there. Here's my list of colors. Here's my list of sizes. That could have been done in 1 JSON. I decided to do it in 2, but I could have done it in 1. Okay. Here's the HTML. I have, again, some region of my page where I am applying the view stuff to. I have a span for a for loop over the sizes. I have a span for the for loop over the colors. And here's the weird little binding thing. Sometimes, and this will be an interesting, I'll try this in a minute. This is this sort of standard things you could just put a colon in front of, and then some things it wasn't expecting you to viewify it. So it used to be that you had to say vbind, but they keep updating the version. So I'm gonna try in a minute to, let's take this out and see if I can get away without the vbind here. So I took that out, let me save it. I'm in the HTML, so that's what I can run. It's still working, okay. So this vbind here that I had is sort of an older idea, but you might see it around. Let me undo and save again. So that was, I had that from an older version back, I think in when I was using version 2, maybe even early version 3. It expected certain things like ID and value to be coded, and so it expected them to just say colon. If you're doing it in an unexpected place, you said vbind, but it's not needed anymore, but you might see it around if you're Googling up examples. Okay, so I set the style, and that's where and again, you do the concatenating within the curly brackets. So this, you don't say my style equals background color colon, and then introduce the curly bracket. You have the curly bracket and the background color within. And both React and Vue sort of have that particular version of concatenating within the curly brackets, not outside the curly brackets. And it seems to, when you first start, then you ought to be able to do it outside the curly bracket or inside, and it's just not always the case. Okay, but that's how I got those crazy colors. Here I'm showing the size and color and breaking, and again, I'm using an object, so I have the various properties, the text of the size, the value of the size, and the text of the color and the value of the color. And so I gave these 2 color and size same sort of structure, that they had text and value. But that by no means has to be the situation. Both of these objects that I'm getting from my JSONs don't have to have the same properties. That's just a coincidence of my example. Okay, and what am I doing in the JS? I have an array of possible sizes. I have an array of possible colors. I have an object for the user selected size. I have a variable, which is an object, which is the user's chosen color. So the possibilities are arrays, the actual choices are objects. Here I am in created, I got rid of mounted, it's just there and commented out. And I'm just showing you two ways to do this. So I say that this, and I haven't gotten inside any functions yet, self is this. So self is just something I made up, but I made it correspond to this. And then down here, when I'm fetching, and I want to refer to the object of the class, I can say self. So self sizes is data sizes. When I did the colors, I did it the way I did it previously. I had a fat arrow. And if you use a fat arrow function, the fat arrow does not claim the word this. This is very subtle stuff. So this function and this function are just slightly different functions, and that this second function down here I'm using for color, I use a newer type of function, the fat arrow function. And a fat arrow function, one of its properties is that it does not make any claims on the word this. So the word this down here still belongs to the class, to the object of the class. Whereas here, where my functions are not fat arrow functions, the word this would be claimed by the function and not by the class, not by the object of the class. And so if I said this here instead of self, it would not work. So I'm just showing you two methods. You can pick either one and use it. If you like fat arrow functions, I tend to use the fat arrow functions more. But if you don't like fat arrow functions, then there's this confusion about the word this, the keyword this. And so if you want a this that belongs to the class, or I should say the object of the class, then that's what the job of this self is, to grab hold of the, before I get into any functions, I'm in the created, but that doesn't matter. That's not making any claims. But before I get into the fetch, which would normally claim a this, I am using the word self to remember this and then use that. Okay. Just, I want you to see the two approaches to this in case you go searching to other examples other than mine. I walk around when I'm giving a test, and some of you don't like my examples at all. Some of you say, shouldn't curse. Some of you just say, to hell with you, Blum. And I'm just going to Google examples during the test. I don't like your examples. And so you might find other examples. But so you might find this style, you might find that style. I want the people who pay attention to me to realize that there are two styles and what the important differences in the two style. And that is, one uses the fat arrow function and one does not. Okay. Enough blathering on. Let's show you what you have to do. We did room reservations before, so now we're just revisiting this example of room reservations. So you're going to have a set of possible rooms, a set of possible days, a set of possible times, and those should be arrays of objects with some kind of JSON-like notation. You could put them in a JSON file, but I'm not saying you have to. So you probably want to use a JSON notation, but it doesn't have to be an external JSON file. But you'll have your choices for what are the possible rooms, what are the possible days, what are the possible times. When we did this before, the rooms were in a drop-down select, but now it's all radio buttons, 3 set of choices. So, and then you'll have, so your data will have these 3 arrays. Your data will also have 3 additional objects, 1 for the choice of room, 1 for the choice of day, 1 for the choice of time. And then there will be another array for the reservations, which we'll get to in a minute. So you have a set of choices of room, then the user choice, a set of choices for days, and then the user's day, a set of choices for times, and then user's time. Have your view generate 3 sets of radio buttons. So just take this last example and do it 3 times instead of 2. And then as the user's clicking the button, you're just going to display this concatenation. Here's my choice of room, the user's choice of room, and the user's choice of day, and the user's choice of time. Then you're going to have a button. This is more like, go back to the previous example where you had the guessing game, or what you did for tip, or what I did in calculate a salary. You'll have a button. The button will have a V on click, and you'll have a method, and then you're going to take that concatenation and add it to this reservation array. We have some code previously to make sure that you're not adding it as a duplicate. And if it's not a duplicate, add it to the array of reservations. And then there should be a list item, an ordered list and a list item, and take this example from the, when did we do this? In the guessing game example, there'll be a loop, a V for over, that generates list items for the various reservations. Okay, so that's marrying this new stuff on radio buttons with some old click event stuff. Any questions? No. All right. So we don't meet Monday. So I see you in a week. Let me stop recording and then I'll hang out for questions.